Elizabeth Young, the woman who tortured kids as part of a religious community in Florida. You may remember she was just arrested in Marietta for the death of a toddler named Moses. That was back in the 80s. This week, we were the first to talk to the sister of one of her victims and to one of her neighbors in Marietta. Today, we're hearing from one of the people who knows her best, Anna's daughter. In a captivating interview with 11 Alive's Christy Etheridge, Joy Fluker talks about seeing this torture firsthand.
Well, I lived through a lot of it. I was down there, so I knew about a lot of this before it came to light.
You witnessed it?
I witnessed a lot of it, yes. I just have nightmares about the last time I saw Moses.
January 28th, 2017. Joy Fluker leads Alachua County Sheriff's detectives through what was once Micanopy's house of prayer. Approximately 3 decades have passed since she was last here. She has just rediscovered the closet where, as a child, she found the infant body of her murdered, adopted brother Moses.
Joy, do you believe this is where he was murdered?
It was a place for new beginnings. Men and women who were down on their luck could find refuge at the House of Prayer for All People. Led by their charismatic leader, Mother Anna, the religious boarding home was a place where God-fearing adults struggling with substance abuse, mental health issues, or criminal pasts could put their lives back together. There they shared resources and built a community where all people were welcomed. Mother Anna and her husband, who went by the name Brother Jonah, started the ministry in Waldo, Florida back in 1983. Then in 1985, moved it to a rural farmhouse in Micanopy, Florida. Their vision was to provide spiritual and economic security for the troubled flock that followed their teachings of hard work, daily prayer, and frequent Bible study. For Mother Anna, it was the chance for her followers to live like the book of Acts, where everyone shares everything and no one wants for anything. But like so many controlling religious movements, it took on a life of its own. The House of Prayer for All People started off as a good thing, but by the time it closed down in the mid-1990s, at least 2 children were dead and others were scarred for life. Before Mother Anna existed, there was just Anna Davidson, who loved disco and partying and lived in Chicago with her children and husband Robert. Though known to her children as a strict disciplinarian, Anna Davidson was not religious. But that all changed in 1973, following Labor Day weekend. Catherine Davidson, the biological daughter of Robert and stepdaughter to Anna, was reported missing along Lake Michigan. The family told investigators that they went to Warren Dunes State Park to enjoy a picnic. After arriving, the siblings went down to the water. 15 minutes later, Kathy was gone.
Over Labor Day weekend in 1973, 3 cars of people drove from South Hermosa in Chicago through Northwest Indiana and up into Southwest Michigan to have a picnic at Warren Dunes State Park. Labor Day weekend is the unofficial end of summer, and on Saturday, September 1st, 1973, the Davidson family piled into those 3 cars and brought a picnic dinner with them to enjoy an afternoon on the sand and maybe do some splashing in Lake Michigan. They pulled into the last parking lot at Warren Dunes State Park, the one nearest Painterville Creek. The creek empties into Lake Michigan, where that patch of trees sits. The family had been to Warren Dunes several times, and had just been there a few days before. But on this day, 6 kids jumped from the cars, and 5 of them ran straight to the sand, as their father, Robert Davidson, and his wife, Anna Davidson, Anna's brother, Marvin Bobo, and a family friend that they call a cousin, all finished unpacking the cars. While the adults finished up at their cars, the 5 kids ventured down the beach to that patch of trees and played around in Painterville Creek. One child, Anna's 6-year-old son, was kept back with the adults because he was too little to go off with the other kids while they unpacked the cars. Newspaper articles say that Kathy, also just 6 years old, and her siblings ran over to where the creek empties into the lake. But none of those kids were actually Kathy's siblings. Kathy did have a sister, and that older sister had gone back to live with their mom around Christmas time. That sister hadn't seen Kathy since. Their father, Robert, dropped her off over at their maternal grandmother's house, and he wasn't very happy that she wanted to go back to her mom's. And so Robert, out of anger, had told his daughter that she would never see Kathy again. And she never did get to see Kathy again. The girls had grown up with their mom and hadn't really spent much time with their dad because he was in and out of prison. But then Robert was released and had gotten remarried. He started classes, and so did his wife, both of them studying at Governors State University in Chicago. And though Kathy's mom, Portia, didn't know Robert's wife, Anna, very well, she seemed nice, and she had some kids from previous relationships, and seemed like a good mom. Portia thought it was good that Robert wanted to spend time with his daughters, so she was happy that Kathy was getting to stay with her dad and spend time with not only her dad, but also her stepmother and the kids. They did fun things as a family, like go to the beach. But this time, after spending maybe 10 to 15 minutes playing, Anna called the kids to come back and get dinner, and all the kids came back. But now, 6-year-old Kathy wasn't with them. The family looked around, yelling for her, but they couldn't find her anywhere. She had just been there with her 4 step-siblings just moments ago. And before long, park staff, police, and volunteers were all out looking for the little girl. The thing was, as the search went on, it was realized there weren't that many black families on the beach that day, and no one they talked to remembered seeing a little 6-year-old black girl on that end of the beach at all. Authorities had been told that Kathy was wearing a white sleeveless blouse, blue shorts, and white plastic sandals. They called in a helicopter, and people from all over Michigan and the surrounding states all joined in to find the little girl. During the 4-day search, someone found a little pair of panties, but these were never actually identified as belonging to Kathy. Some sources say these panties were green, and others say white, but the original articles say they were white, and that after the Davidsons went home and checked Kathy's clothes, they looked like some she had, but they couldn't be sure that they were actually hers. About 500 searchers all came together to look for Kathy. Black families in the same county were especially concerned for this little girl. They were afraid that maybe not everything that could be done was going to be done by authorities, so groups of black men banded together and joined forces to help search. An outside observer from a different part of the country may not know why black families were especially concerned, but Warren Dunes State Park is in Berrien County, Michigan, and just a few years before, the city of Benton Harbor had experienced 4 days of rioting in 1966. Those riots came about for some very complex social and racial reasons, and they're just too important to go into for this short video, but I plan to make a separate video about the murders that happened before and during the Benton Harbor riots that remain unsolved, and why some people in the community talked about having heard that a police officer could be involved. Kathy's dad helped fuel the flame that Kathy being black was why she hadn't been found. Some reporters, politicians, and community leaders believed Kathy's dad until they spoke to the police, and they were given all the information about how the 4-day-long search was conducted and about how difficult it had been to get the Davidsons to come in for their interviews. Basically, no trace of her was found at all. 500 people on foot, horseback, in trail vehicles, a helicopter, and nothing. One camper named Debbie came forward on the first day, saying she thought she had seen Kathy at the bathroom building in campground number 3. But the initial description she gave didn't really match Kathy. At first, she said the little girl she saw was about 3 years old and wearing different clothes than Kathy. They talked to Debbie several times, and over those times, the description of the little girl that she now says looked about 6 still had a different hairstyle and clothes than Catherine. There was a black family at the same campground, and they had 2 little girls. It's believed that the girl that Debbie saw was actually one of their kids. I took a road trip and camped here with my kid for a couple days while researching this case, and my child, who's a little younger than Kathy, was not able to walk from the beach to Campground 3 without having to stop and rest several times, and it took us a couple hours to walk the path. And if I had tried to carry my kid, who weighed less than Kathy, there's no way I could have made it without having to stop and rest even more. And if driven in a car from the beach to Campground 3, Kathy would have had to been driven from the beach down this road, then past the manned ranger station, then turn into the campground to get to the restroom. While everyone else searched for Kathy, the other 5 children were sent back to Chicago. This posed to be a problem when Robert refused to bring the children back to talk with investigators, saying he didn't want to incur the expense of bringing the kids back from Chicago, which was about an hour and a half or 2-hour drive. It took almost 2 weeks for the kids to finally be questioned by investigators, and the whole story seemed a little weird to investigators at the time, but the other 5 kids all said the same thing as their parents. And even though Kathy's parents were acting what someone described as off, there wasn't really anything pointing to them as involved. And the only answer that the parents had given that was different from the kids was when they were asked if they stopped anywhere on their way to the state park. And the kids said no, but Anna and Robert said they stopped on the way and picked up some fried chicken and hot food for the picnic. While police and searchers were looking for their 6-year-old daughter, and while police were trying to figure out if Kathy was lost at the park somewhere, had gotten hurt, was washed far into Lake Michigan, or if some creeper had come along and kidnapped her, Kathy's father and stepmother were observed by police hanging out in a station wagon, drinking and laughing, carrying on with some friends on the first or second night that Kathy was missing, and they didn't help search for her. People thought it was odd that grieving parents were partying, but we all know that people can do weird stuff when they're grieving or frightened. Plus, there wasn't anything at all pointing to them as suspects. Their kids all said the same thing. They and Kathy had gone to play in the creek, and then by the time they came back to the cars, Catherine was gone. But no one could remember what she had been doing the last time they saw her. Anna and Robert both refused for several days to go to the police post to be interviewed by police, but Kathy's mother, Portia, came right away when she was asked. Robert said he and Anna were too busy at the park to come and talk to police, but each time the investigators went to talk to them at the park, they were surrounded by friends of the Davidsons, who were shouting at the police, attempting to question witnesses over top of the police, and the police simply weren't able to conduct a proper interview while at the campground because people were being so disruptive. Kathy was 6 years old when she disappeared, and no trace of her has ever been found. The day Kathy disappeared changed something deep in the Davidson family. Some of the kids remember coming back to look for Kathy over the next 2 years, but they never found her. After the disappearance of their beautiful little girl, no one blamed the Davidson family for relocating. It had to be hard to return back to that apartment in Chicago without their daughter. So the family moved down south and suddenly became religious. And people understood why. With no idea of what had happened to Kathy, they probably just needed religious strength and some new, less painful scenery. People just kind of assumed that they held their lives together in whatever ways that they could and moved forward with a huge hole in their hearts. Robert and Anna went on to have a child together after Kathy's disappearance, and they named her Joy, perhaps hoping to recapture a little happiness. And this is the point in my videos where things usually start winding down, and I show you Kathy's photo, and I tell you, if you have information, to please contact the Michigan State Police. But this time, the story is about to go in a direction that no one would expect. It goes back years before to Ohio, to a little girl that Kathy had never heard of. But back in 1968, Anna, whose last name then had been Molden, was arrested and charged with excessive punishment when her 5-year-old stepdaughter was found to have been beaten with a stick so harshly she was covered in bruises and covered in welts, and she was voiding blood from her vagina. This kid was beaten so badly that she was bleeding from her vagina. But not many people knew about that. So when the Davidsons moved, it didn't seem odd. They had a child missing, and maybe they just needed a new start. And as it turns out, when the Davidsons moved down south, they ended up first in Georgia and then moved down to rural Florida. Remember, they had found religion, and as it turns out, they got so hardcore into religion that they started a religious group in the 1980s called the House of Prayer for All People.
The search for her drew hundreds, and helicopter pilots scanned the area, but no trace of Kathy was ever found. Today, Anna's youngest daughter, Joy Fluker, tells a different story. Although Joy had not been born at the time of Kathy's death, she told the FBI that her older sister admitted that 6-year-old Kathy died after being beaten, tied up, and gagged in a closet in the Davidson Chicago apartment. Although the abuse was intentional, Joy believes the death was an accident, and in her guilt over Kathy's death, Anna turned to religion. Whatever the reason, the Youngs moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and began a life of mission work. In the early 1980s, they moved to Florida. When the House of Prayer began to take shape, Mother Anna laid out a rigid set of Old Testament beliefs. Wearing full-length robes and adhering to a Levitical diet of organic vegetables, fruits, and legumes were just some of the changes she made in her life. Like many other destructive cult leaders, over time, Mother Anna became increasingly egocentric, unpredictable, punitive, and remorseless. She distorted the tenets of her Pentecostal faith to punish and control her followers. Adults and children were separated. Anyone who sinned was beaten. Children who were possessed by a demon were tortured and starved. Survivors of the cult recall extreme punishment, such as being locked in a box or cage for days with no food, water, or toilet. It was the torture, starvation, and murder of 3-year-old Eamon Moses Harper that Anna Elizabeth Young would eventually be charged with murdering. Mother Anna used fear through emotional and physical abuse to control and manipulate her followers, because despite the mistreatment, they stayed. Followers of Mother Anna rarely, if ever, tried to stop the beatings and degradation, and they never told anyone on the outside. In 1992, Mother Anna was charged with felony child abuse after bathing 12-year-old Nikki Nicholson in a steel tub full of caustic chemicals that permanently burned her skin. It was to teach her a lesson for not bathing properly. But after the charges were made, Mother Anna fled from Florida and managed to stay under the police radar for 8 years. In 2001, she was finally convicted. When she was arrested in Illinois, she was using the name Elizabeth Mother Anna McDuffie and was employed as a home health care worker. She pled no contest and was sentenced to 6 months in prison. She lived quietly in Cobb County, Georgia for the next 15 years. In fact, Anna's past might have remained behind her if not for a mother-daughter fight in 2017. Joy Fluker says she and her mother had gotten into a fight over her 15-year-old because she felt her mother was undermining her parenting. Her mother came at her with a metal lamp, and for the first time, Joy openly accused her mother of murder. Joy said that night began her quest to find justice for the boy she knew as Moses, who had died in the cult. Since then, detectives have traveled the country putting their case against Mother Anna together. Their investigation indicates that Anna not only tortured children in her boarding school between March 1988 and June 1992, but committed the premeditated first-degree homicide murder of Eamon Harper, who was also known as Moses. In December 2017, a grand jury indicted Anna on a first-degree murder charge for Moses' death. Law enforcement arrested her in Marietta, Georgia, where she had lived for the past 15 years and was now going by her married name of Anderson. She has entered a plea of not guilty and is currently awaiting trial in the Alachua County Jail. Officials, however, don't believe this is the end of their investigation into Mother Anna, and that she may in fact have left behind a long trail of victims over the past half-century.
Can't sweep a child's life or any human life, innocent life, under the rug.
Ex-cult leader charged with murdering 2 toddlers is expected to spend the rest of her life in prison after pleading no contest in court. Now, 79-year-old Anna Young has been sentenced to serve the next 30 years in prison. Young pleaded no contest to charges of murder and manslaughter today in front of many survivors of the former Gainesville area cult House of Prayer. Joy Fluker turned her mother in for killing one of the children, which sparked an investigation that led to a second murder charge. And that investigation uncovered more claims of horrific abuse and neglect at the compound south of Gainesville. All the allegations surfacing because one woman turned her in, her daughter.
I remember having a shrieking fear. The box.
They lived through a nightmare.
And I thought she was dead.
Victims say they were starved, caged, tortured, even killed.
You did something wrong, you go in the box. And you could be in that box for days and then know when you're going to come out.
Cult survivors.
That I start thinking, maybe I am insane.
With scars you can see.
And you know what's so crazy?
And many you cannot.
I was actually hoping a little bit I was.
3 decades later, the matriarch is facing her sins.
It was a tumultuous relationship.
As a child, Joy Fluker says she witnessed horrors, memories she held inside for decades.
And I remember my mom speaking in tongues and being filled with the Holy Ghost as he was getting whipped.
Memories sealed away until one day when her mother, Anna Young, criticized her parenting.
I blurted out, how can you tell me how to raise my kids when you killed 2 children?
And it's so unbelievable that you wonder if it's true or not. And the way that this case began was with a phone call from Anna's daughter, Joy.
The House of Prayer started out as supposed to be a safe haven.
It was a place for second chances, security, even salvation. Nearly 24 members joined Mother Anna over the next decade, including children attending her religious boarding school.
As people started idolizing her, other broken people, people began to look at you as the voice of God.
In her dark interpretation of the Pentecostal faith, Joy says her mother would torture and abuse members for their sins, starving, caging, and whipping them with extension cords.
They're willing to lay down and take beatings and whippings and starvations and be in boxes and eat cow manure and everything because they love God so much. They just want to be pure and holy.
Former members recall a 2-year-old named Katanya Jackson, whom Anna believed was possessed.
And everyone was chanting, the blood of Jesus, the blood of Jesus, the blood of Jesus. And she was in the middle of a circle.
Katanya's brother, John Neal, told investigators Anna forced the toddler to run in circles and beat her if she stopped. Soon after, John says the child began having seizures.
I heard her screaming in the next room over, getting a spanking, and it was intense. And then all of a sudden, the crying stopped.
Katanya's death certificate shows she died from a seizure disorder at Shands Hospital in Gainesville.
We understand today that certain injuries can cause seizures. This house, it was designed to conceal.
The hidden compartments at the farm, those were areas built to hide John Neal.
A skin infection that landed 8-year-old John Neal in the hospital finally prompted a child abuse investigation. The same doctor who treated his sister Katanya noticed scars all over his body and part of his ear missing.
When they would go in, they would see a very clean property, a very clean house, very orderly, very organized.
What they did not see was John Neal.
Miss Anna had trapdoors, secret rooms, so she was able to hide children and to mask the goings-on there.
Court documents detail the layout of the house we visited.
It was just under these stairs where he was trapped behind this wall, deprived of food, water, and sunlight, all while the investigators looking for him were just feet away.
There was never any charges there, so once again, it kind of flew under the radar.
In 1986, a new arrival. Iman Harper, the child of a teen mother in Chicago whom Anna renamed Moses.
And I remember my mom getting the news. We got him. We got Brother Moses.
Joy says initially Anna thought he'd be the boy she and her husband Jonah never had.
After my dad died, I just remember my mom changing towards him.
Witnesses would later tell investigators Anna starved the child, beat him, and locked him in closets. One said she thought the boy's thumb would fall off.
His lips were so crusted over that part of his lip, like the crust, touched my finger. Like, I've given it water. And sometimes, thinking about it, I still feel it. I feel it. Sometimes I still smell him. I was made to help.
Do you think your mom understands the gravity of what she did?
No, she couldn't. If she understood the gravity of it, I don't think she could have lived with herself.
She says her mom has mental illness. It runs in the family. Joy says her grandmother was in a mental institution, but her mom never got help.
She immersed herself in religion and thought she was doing what was right. It wasn't just children that got beat. Adults got beat too, just as equally. It's just that children, because their bodies were frail and smaller, they couldn't, live through it.
Joy, how many people do you think your mother has killed, whether on purpose or not?
Well, I know for a fact 3, and it's children. I have to take ownership of my part, not speaking up. Maybe they can now help others.
Soon after, according to police, the former member found the toddler dead in a closet.
Anna ordered that child be taken outside to an area where they did the burning. The child was taken out to that fire and burned, according to witnesses.
It would be decades before Joy shared that terrible memory with her half-sister.
So she came back and said, not again. Like, what do you mean, not again? She goes, that's how your sister died.
Anna and Jonah reported 6-year-old Catherine Davidson missing in 1973. The child was never found. Joy believes this is what triggered her mother's extreme faith.
I was paying penance, Kathy's death, and my dad right along with her. They started up to help people.
Anna's church collapsed in 1992 after the case of 12-year-old Nikki Nicholson.
She was in the chemical bath. She received burns on her legs.
Police reports say Nikki was held down in a metal tub filled with chemicals and scalding water.
It took these ways to exonerate the devil from people.
The girl suffered second-degree burns and had to learn how to walk again. Charged with child abuse, Anna fled with Joy and remained on the run until 2001.
She was located living with relatives in an attic in Chicago. She was extradited back down here and ended up serving time over that.
Anna served 192 days in jail, but it would be another 16 years before she was back in police custody.
If it wouldn't have been for Joy calling and having these memories and telling us about it, this would have gone unnoticed, unpunished.
Anna was charged with murdering Iman Harper. Just this week, she was charged with killing Katanya. And Michigan police have reopened the cold case disappearance of 6-year-old Catherine.
It took a lot of courage from a lot of different people to come forward, bring this to light.
Thanks to these survivors, for the first time in more than 3 decades, Iman, Katanya, and Catherine have a voice.
What I'm not going to do, though, is lie about, the lives that were lost during the process of, all of this journey, because I feel like if I live with those, then I'm just as guilty.